So are China and Cuba working together to collect signals intelligence from the United States? With Cuba being 90 miles from U.S. Naval Air Station Key West and 375 miles from MacDill Air Force Base in Tampa, Florida, it is possible. MacDill is the headquarters to U.S. Central Command and U.S. Special Operations Command. So when it comes to China and Cuba, what began as a connection rooted in communist solidarity has evolved into a strategic partnership that now raises some alarms in Washington. Recent reports suggest that China is expanding its intelligence presence on the island, constructing sophisticated listening posts that could monitor U.S. communications and military activity. While both the U.S. and Chinese governments have downplayed these claims to avoid escalation, satellite imagery and open source intelligence indicate that Chinese-linked intelligence facilities in Cuba are real and growing. One of the most scrutinized sites is in Bejucal, a longtime intelligence hub south of Havana. This facility, which once housed Soviet nuclear weapons during the Cuban Missile Crisis, is now believed to be a key part of Cuba's signal intelligence or SIGINT operations. Satellite imagery from early 2024 shows antennas positioned to intercept satellite communication, and underground bunkers built between 2010 and 2019 suggest a growing intelligence capability. Reports indicate that Bejucal is strategically located to monitor U.S. satellite launches from Florida, particularly those by SpaceX, which China has a vested interest in tracking as it works to advance its own space technology. On the other side of the island, near Santiago de Cuba, a previously unreported intelligence facility has been identified in El Salao. This site, under construction since 2021, features a massive circular antenna array designed to detect radio signals from thousands of miles away. If operational, it could provide China with real-time intelligence on U.S. Navy operations in the Caribbean and even the South Atlantic. Evidence suggests the project is linked to Chinese-funded infrastructure development in the area, further cementing Beijing's influence in Cuba. Another site, Wahe, just north of Bejucal, has grown significantly over the past 2 decades. Once a small facility, it now hosts multiple antennas and a solar farm, providing an independent power source that could keep intelligence operations running even during Cuba's frequent blackouts. The mix of military security features and agricultural activity suggests an effort to conceal the true nature of the site. Meanwhile, Calabazar, a fourth intelligence facility near Havana, appears to have been modernized with satellite tracking technology that can be used to monitor U.S. space assets. China's deepening presence in Cuba is not limited to intelligence operations. The two countries have steadily increased economic and political cooperation, driven by shared interests and mutual strategic benefits to counter the U.S. Since the early 2000s, China has provided Cuba with billions of dollars in development financing, helping modernize ports, energy infrastructure, and telecommunications. The port of Santiago de Cuba, one of the island's most important trade hubs, was expanded with Chinese investment. Huawei and ZTE, two Chinese companies blacklisted by the U.S. for espionage risks, now provide the backbone of Cuba's digital infrastructure. This technology has not only enabled internet access, but has also given the Cuban government tools for surveillance and control on the island, even covering Guantanamo Bay, the U.S. military prison site. When widespread protests erupted in 2021, the government used Chinese-built systems to shut down internet access, disrupting protesters' ability to organize. For China, Cuba offers an invaluable strategic position, just 90 miles away from the U.S. mainland. This proximity mirrors the U.S. presence in Taiwan, which sits a similar distance from China's coast. By expanding its footprint in Cuba, Beijing is sending a clear signal that it can operate near U.S. borders just as Washington does in the South China Sea, though China is a far cry from deploying actual warships on a rotational basis to the Caribbean. In international forums, Cuba has also been a reliable ally for China, backing Beijing on controversial issues like policies in Xinjiang. In return, China has advocated for lifting the U.S. embargo on Cuba and welcomed the island into its Belt and Road Initiative. As U.S.-China relations grow more tense, the prospect of deeper military cooperation between Beijing and Havana becomes more likely. While no large-scale Chinese military bases have been confirmed in Cuba, reports suggest discussions have taken place about joint training facilities. If China were to deploy military assets to Cuba, it would mark a substantial escalation reminiscent of Cold War-era tensions. Cuba's economic crisis has made it increasingly dependent on external support. Years of declining economic performance, worsened by the COVID-19 pandemic, and U.S. sanctions have left the country struggling with inflation, energy shortages. Some reports even suggest that Cuban citizens have been enlisting in the Russian military to fight in Ukraine, seeking higher wages than they could earn at home. In this climate of desperation, China's financial backing provides a lifeline, giving Beijing leverage to expand its influence. To pull Cuba away from China's growing influence, the United States needs to offer a clear economic and diplomatic alternative that addresses Havana's most pressing needs. First, easing economic sanctions and selectively lifting parts of the embargo could provide Cuba with access to U.S. markets, investment, and tourism, reducing its dependence on Chinese loans and trade. Second, expanding renewable energy and infrastructure projects with U.S. or allied financing could counter China's role in Cuba's development, offering a Western-backed alternative that modernizes the island without deepening its debt to Beijing. Third, diplomatic engagement through high-level talks and security cooperation, such as an anti-narcotics operation or disaster relief partnership, could rebuild trust and encourage Havana to limit intelligence sharing with the Chinese. Finally, promoting private sector engagement by allowing more U.S. businesses to operate in Cuba could increase prosperity and shift economic incentives away from reliance on China's state-backed model. By offering a realistic path to economic stability while respecting Cuban sovereignty, the U.S. could counter Beijing's influence and begin rebuilding strategic ties with Havana. However, this second Trump administration is set to once again take a hard stance against Cuba, which is likely to push Cuba even closer to Beijing and Moscow, intensifying its role as a frontline island in the great power competition. Cuba's growing ties to China raise serious questions about the future of U.S. national security in the Western Hemisphere. While much of the intelligence sharing between the two nations remains hidden, what is clear is that China's presence on the island is expanding, both economically and militarily. Whether this remains limited to intelligence gathering or evolves into a broader military alliance will depend on how U.S.-China-Cuba relations develop in the coming years. One thing is certain, though. Like Taiwan, Cuba may be once again seeing itself as one of the centers of a global power struggle, and its choices will have consequences far beyond its shores.